To remain updated with the latest business news, click on the bell icon.
Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I am Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Budget with BT, our special programming on the upcoming Union Budget for 2022-23. With me today, a very special panel of guests to discuss India's economy, the prospects of growth, and the dark clouds of Omicron that pose a threat to the ongoing recovery. Joining me today, Kaushik Das, Chief Economist India at Deutsche Bank, Madan Sabnavis, the Chief Economist at the Bank of Baroda, and Mr. R. Gopalan, the former Secretary of Economic Affairs in the Union Ministry of Finance. Welcome to the show. Let me begin by asking you, Kaushik, about the key priorities that you see in the emerging situation as far as Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is concerned. She's already had several rounds of meeting and the key budget numbers are being shaped up even as we are speaking. What are your key expectations from the forthcoming budget?
Hi, Siddharth. Thanks for inviting me to your show. This third wave that we are talking about, it doesn't come as a complete surprise. In fact, for the last few months, we've been always kind of fearing that there will be a third wave at some point of time. We just didn't know that it will come through the form of an Omicron related variant. But, the cases have started increasing. And I think, these cases will keep on increasing and probably will peak at some time during February. So this particular third wave obviously will have some effect on the budget formulation. And as far as expectations are concerned, this fiscal year, we have set a fiscal deficit target of 6.8% of GDP, which could go up to 7% because the government has announced more spending in the last month. From there, we would expect that next year they would set a fiscal deficit target of something around 6.5%. Because you would need to support the economy for a little bit longer period of time. We have had a lot of fiscal support in the last 2 years, but given the third wave, we would still need more support. There are two other aspects related to the budget formulation, the challenge, the delicate balance that the finance ministry will face. One is supporting different stakeholders of the economy to ensure that demand is supported. But in a way that it doesn't stoke inflation. Inflation is also becoming a big concern worldwide, and India also we've seen inflation remaining above 5% on an average for the last several months. So how do you form a budget which supports the economy but doesn't cause inflation? And in that way, the government has been supporting capital expenditure. So I would expect capital expenditure to remain strong, and that should create a multiplier impact. And the third aspect is how do you finance that fiscal deficit? How much do you borrow from the market? Does it cause interest rates to increase? Then whether RBI can have to come and buy again bonds. So those issues will come up. So it's a very delicate balance. So I would say we are going with 6.5% of GDP worth fiscal deficit with some bit of support, targeted support for different stakeholders who need the support at this point of time.
Kaushik, what you're saying is continued targeted support and a reduction, even if by 30 basis points on the fiscal deficit. Madan, let me come to you on that before I go to the former policy maker on the panel. Madan, you heard Kaushik, and I would want to begin my question by asking you, given what has happened to the recovery and given what now seems to be happening with the third wave, and we'll all pray and hope that it passes by very, very quickly without causing any major damage. Do you think it's time for the government of India to target a reduction in the fiscal deficit, or should it continue at least from the current year's point of view?
No, I think, Siddharth, as far as the government ideologically is concerned, I would tend to believe that they would be looking at lowering the fiscal deficit ratio, something in the region of 5.5% to 6%. Now, I think the critical factor will really mean that will depend upon what happens in the next 15 days, whether there are lockdowns and curfews which are imposed for a longer period of time. Because we should remember that a critical part of our economy, the services sector, was something which was getting back on its feet. And I remember during October, November, we were quite euphoric, thinking that the pent-up demand has come into services and it's only looking upwards from now onwards. So it all depends upon what the center, the states, the municipals, the panchayats do in terms of lockdowns, because that could actually push back growth. And if that happens, the entire concept of the budget is going to change, because you will need to continue to spend money on relief, because I don't think the states have the wherewithal to spend on relief. So that particular component will have to continue. But knowing the government, the way in which it has behaved in the past, I think moving along the fiscal path will be a priority. And I think side by side, there will of course be this entire saga of disinvestment, because I think that's something which has not yet played out. We're not quite sure if it's going to happen by March. So I think fiscal deficit, capital expenditure, disinvestment, these are the three main things which would be on the agenda of the FM under normal circumstances, which will continue to be even this year. And in case of lockdowns being imposed beyond, say, January 7th, which I think looks very much likely to different measures, then I think the government will have to peg away at certain relief expenditure. Of course, there will be this conundrum about how revenue is going to increase, because we know if there's a lockdown, automatically there will be a hit which is taken by both the center and the states, and there's GST compensation, so on and so forth. But that is something which they will definitely keep up. So I think the compromise may probably be on the fiscal deficit ratio, but definitely I think 5.5% to 6% is what we will be looking at. Maybe 0.25 more, maybe a compromise in case there are further lockdowns in various parts of the country.
Madan, one very quick point before I go to Mr. Gopalan. Do you think it's time to be ideological? Ideological in the sense that India was perhaps the only major economy where the central government, the government was conservative during the pandemic last year, and the Reserve Bank let loose the monetary tap. Do you think it is time to be ideological or be more pragmatic?
No, but I would say, practically speaking, I look at the government as being ideological. So therefore, I think they're going to move on this path, because when conditions were tough, they chose to follow a kind of a fiscal path which wasn't giving too much of freebies, help the poor, let the rich, enable the rich to get back on their feet. And I think that's the policy which they will pursue. There's no reason for them to change things now. I don't think they will do it, even though we can say that it should ideally do it. But I think practically speaking, I don't think the government is going to say, look, let me stick to 6.8 or let me go to 7.5% fiscal deficit and get us out of the rut. I don't think that is the path which the government will choose.
Mr. Gopalan, you've been part of several budgets. You've been right in the thick of it. I want to ask you, do you recall any other time during your long career, including especially in the Ministry of Finance, where in a matter of 3 weeks, practically, the scenario seems to have changed, the estimates seem to be changing, and more importantly, expectations and the animal spirits that drive any economy, they have been impacted in a very short period of time due to the third wave. And what Madan said in terms of the ideology and the very concept of the budget changing, do you think that is what is actually playing out inside North Block right now?
Well, I would say that, this is the third wave is something which is something which we have never seen. This kind of an interruption in the budget preparation process. So we start the process 2 months before. So the numbers we start, getting into, and we finalize expenditure at least a month before. So then it's about the last month when we look into various other issues which crop up. But this kind of a Omicron kind of a third wave did not hit us at any point in time during my budget preparation. So this is something very, very new. As far as philosophy is concerned, yes, we had grappled with some problems at some point in time about when the 2009 crisis, when we were trying to whether to continue with the benefits which we are giving for reflating the economy, should we continue with that or not? That was something which kept on for quite some time until the last about 25 days. But barring that, I don't think we ever had this kind of a issue. And philosophy change, it's just not possible, because once you start laying down the philosophy for the budget, which is about 2 months before, it's not possible to change the philosophy unless you have some very, very critical and important happenings which have taken place and which requires resources to be diverted elsewhere or resources to be put into some other place. then that's a different issue. That has never happened in my time.
Mr. Gopalan, one quick point. What kind of budget would be ideal in the current economic situation? We still need to support growth. We need to do much more for job creation. And there is obviously inflation that's also been inching up gradually.
Look, I mean, all these are very important aspects to be looked into during this budget. But inflation is slightly a different thing, except on the supply side, where we try to do something to ensure that the supplies, I mean, are not prevented from happening by any other method, any other means. That is something we'll be very cautious about. So, supply side enhancement is something which budget should do based on the programs and promotions they do through various departments and various institutional structures they prepare or they create at that point in time. So these are all things which can happen through the budgetary process. Otherwise, inflation is something which is a different phenomenon, I mean, altogether. But the budget also has a philosophy on what do we do? I mean, do we look at the inequality? Do we look at the consumption improvement at this point in time? Or do we see that the export infrastructure which is required to be beefed up to take advantage of at this point in time when exports can really, I mean, go up? These are all things which are looked into, and I think by this time all those things will be under the belt, and they would have had extensive discussions and then created a few openings for that.
Well, clearly it's not an easy exercise for the mandarins in North Block. Kaushik, coming back to you, it's very clear that one of the key possibilities at this stage, and once again I'm saying this with the hope that it doesn't pan out like that, but if we head towards more restrictions on economic activity, inflation is possibly going to respond in a way which will be positive, but not given the circumstances. What do you expect from a macroeconomic point of view, given the situation now? And I know it could change 2 weeks later, but I'm still asking you to give us a forecast.
No, Siddharth, you hit the nail on the head. And I started by saying the budget has to be such a way that it supports growth, but it doesn't stoke inflation too much, because at the end of the day, if you have inflation, it hits the poor the most. So you're giving with one hand and taking from the other if inflation goes up by deflating the real income. So you need to be careful of how you decide to spend the money. So the government has been, stressing more on capital expenditure. In this year, the capital expenditure is up 30%, the budgeted number, 5.5 trillion. So I would expect the government to put more emphasis on capital expenditure even in FY23, because that also has a big multiplier impact as far as job creation is concerned. And the center will also push the states to spend as much as possible on capex, because we know that the state capex has more multiplier impact on creating jobs. So I would assume that the targeted support, the demand-driven support, will only be given to the needy and people who need relief, not for the entire, economic class. So they'll pick and choose where they need the most, and then the major thrust will be on capital expenditure, both from the center and state.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.